I always believed the worst mistakes were the little ones, the ones you don't think twice about until it's too late. A wrong word, a wrong turn, a small decision that looks harmless in the moment, but opens a door you can never close again. Looking back, I know exactly where it went wrong for us. I know the second where we should have stopped, admitted the risk, and gone home. But we didn't. We kept going. And that choice destroyed everything. It was early autumn when we planned the trip. My cousin Daniel had come back from overseas, and he wanted a weekend escape with just the four of us, him, me, my friend Melissa, and her brother Aaron. We were in our mid-20s, restless, convinced life owed us excitement. Daniel suggested a road trip to the mountains. Nothing dramatic, just driving up into the hills, camping by a lake, and returning before Monday morning. "Come on," he had said, grinning that wide grin that always made people follow him. "We'll make memories. One last adventure before real life buries us." I should have known better. We set out on a Friday afternoon, the trunk full of sleeping bags, cheap food, and the kind of nervous energy that makes people laugh too loudly at nothing. The weather was calm, the air crisp with the smell of fallen leaves. For the first few hours, it felt perfect. The highway wound steadily upward, the towns growing smaller behind us. Melissa played music, Aaron argued about directions, and Daniel drove with his window down, humming like nothing could ever touch him. I watched the sun dip lower, its light bending across the hills, and thought, maybe this was what happiness felt like. It was only later, when the gas station attendant told us about the storm, that I felt the first hint of unease. "Rain's coming heavy tonight," the old man said, leaning on the counter as Daniel paid for fuel. "Best stick to the main highway. Back roads flood easy, and once you're stuck, nobody will find you till morning." He said it like a warning, not advice. His eyes lingered on us longer than felt comfortable. But Daniel just laughed. We'll be fine. We're not planning to take back roads anyway." That was the first lie. We drove on, the last bit of daylight fading behind thick clouds. Melissa suggested stopping at a motel since the storm seemed close. But Daniel shook his head. "We'll make the lake before dark. It's only an hour away." An hour later, the rain began. It came suddenly, hard, like the sky was splitting open. The wipers struggled, the road gleamed black, and visibility shrank to almost nothing. We slowed down, but the highway stretched endlessly ahead with no signs for the lake. Aaron checked his phone for directions. "There's a shortcut up ahead," he said. "Cuts across the forest and connects straight to the campground. GPS says it saves half an hour." Melissa frowned. "Didn't that old guy say the back roads flood?" Aaron shrugged. "It's fine. It's just rain. Besides, Daniel can handle it." Daniel smirked. And that was it. None of us wanted to argue. None of us wanted to be the one who ruined the adventure. So when the narrow turn appeared, marked only by a bent sign nearly hidden by branches, Daniel slowed and turned the wheel. That was the bad decision, the one we should never have made. The road narrowed quickly, the trees leaning close as though they were whispering about us. Rain hammered the windshield, and the headlights cut only a few feet into the thick dark. The asphalt was cracked, with weeds pushing through, and the car jolted with every dip. "Maybe we should turn back," Melissa muttered, hugging her arms. But there was nowhere to turn. The trees pressed in too tight, the mud on the shoulders too deep. We were locked into the road, like it had swallowed us whole. Daniel kept driving. "It's fine. Just a rough patch. We'll hit the campground soon." But minutes turned to half an hour, and the road stretched on endlessly, twisting deeper into the woods. My stomach clenched tighter with every mile. Then we saw the first sign. It was a wooden board nailed to a tree, half rotted and barely readable through the rain. But when the headlights swept across it, I caught the word carved deep into the wood. Leave. We all saw it, nobody spoke. Daniel laughed nervously, calling it probably some prank. But his hands tightened on the wheel, and for the first time that night, his confidence looked thin. Another mile, another sign. This one splintered, hanging from rusted nails. Turn back. The rain blurred the letters, but the message was clear. Melissa whispered, "Daniel, please." But he cut her off. "It's just a joke. Locals trying to scare outsiders. Don't fall for it." Yet his voice didn't sound certain anymore. The forest thickened, branches scraping against the roof like fingernails. My pulse pounded with every groan of the tires against wet asphalt. Then, without warning, we saw him. A man, standing at the edge of the road. He was soaked, clothes clinging to his body, but he didn't move as our headlights hit him. His face was pale, eyes dark hollows, and he raised one hand slowly, not to wave, but to point. He pointed back the way we had come. Daniel swore under his breath and swerved around him, the car fishtailing slightly on the slick road. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to admit what we had just seen. But 5 minutes later, he was there again. Standing in the rain, the same hollow face, the same raised hand pointing backward. Melissa started crying. Aaron demanded we speed up, but Daniel's knuckles were white on the wheel. I couldn't even breathe. No matter how fast we drove, the man appeared again and again, always ahead of us, always pointing back. And then the road ended. It stopped without warning. 1 second, there was a cracked asphalt under the tires. The next, there was nothing but mud and a wall of trees. Daniel slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just feet from the forest. The rain pounded harder, thunder shaking the sky. We sat in silence, the only sound our ragged breathing. "What now?" Aaron whispered. Daniel cursed, trying to turn the car, but the mud dragged the tires. We were stuck. That was when the figure appeared again. Not on the roadside this time, but directly in front of the car, standing in the mud, drenched, his face closer now, clearer. His skin looked wrong gray, stretched too thin as though waterlogged. His mouth opened slowly, and for the first time, we heard his voice. "Go back!" The sound wasn't a shout. It wasn't even loud. It was a hollow whisper, yet it filled the car like a scream. Melissa sobbed. Aaron yelled for Daniel to reverse, but the tires only spun uselessly. The mud held us like a trap. The figure stepped closer, water dripping from his face, though the rain seemed to fall around him, not on him. His eyes fixed on us, unblinking. And then he pointed again. Back. Always back. We tried everything. We pushed, we cursed, we begged the car to move. But the deeper we fought, the more stuck we became. The storm raged, the forest leaned closer, and that figure never left. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt broken. Melissa's cries grew hoarse. Aaron's anger turned to silence, and Daniel's face hollowed with dread. Finally, with shaking hands, Daniel opened the door. "Stay here," he said. "I'll find help." "No," I begged. "Don't leave the car." But he stepped into the rain, his figure swallowed by the trees within seconds. We never saw him again. The night stretched endlessly. Every shadow looked alive, every crack of thunder a warning. The figure never left the edge of the trees. Sometimes I thought I saw more of them, shapes moving in the dark, but I refused to believe it. By dawn, the storm had passed, the sky washed pale and empty. But Daniel didn't return. When we finally managed to dig the tires free and crawl back toward the highway, the signs were gone. The road was gone too. There was only forest, thick and silent, as though the path had never existed. We reported Daniel missing, Search teams combed the woods for weeks. They found nothing, no trace of him, not even footprints. Melissa never recovered. Aaron stopped speaking about it entirely. As for me, I still dream of that figure every night standing in the rain, pointing back, always back. Because I know the truth now. That shortcut wasn't just a road, it was a choice, a door we should never have opened. And once you take it, you don't get to come back whole. Now we are going to our second story. I have always believed curiosity is not harmless. It pretends to be small, a passing thought you can laugh at, but sometimes it becomes a trap. Sometimes it pushes you forward, whispering that you should just look, just take one step further, because what harm could it possibly do? And when you listen, when you give in, you find yourself standing in places you should never have touched, in situations you can never undo. That was the mistake we made. That was the bad decision that ruined everything. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I had gone with 3 friends to a small rural town where Aaron's uncle owned an old cabin. The plan was simple. Stay for 2 nights, relax, wander the woods, roast food over fire, and return before work started again on Monday. The town itself was barely more than a cluster of houses and a gas station. It was surrounded by farmland and woods that stretched on for miles. People there were polite, but their eyes always seemed to watch you a little longer than felt normal, like they were waiting for you to ask something they hoped you never would. On our first evening, we went into the small store near the gas station to buy extra food. While Aaron and Daniel argued over what to cook, I wandered past the shelves and overheard 2 old men talking near the counter. "Still standing after all these years," one muttered. "Best leave it alone," the other replied quickly. "That place swallows fools." They noticed me, listening, and both went silent. Their eyes followed me until I looked away. Later that night, when we sat outside the cabin under the dim glow of a lantern, I asked if anyone knew what they were talking about. Melissa leaned forward, her voice low. "They mean the house," she said. "I heard about it when we were kids. It's an old abandoned house in the woods. People say it's cursed. Some even say people went inside and never came out." Aaron chuckled. "It's just a story locals tell to scare outsiders. Every town has one." But Melissa shook her head. "No, this is different. My cousin swore she and her friends saw lights there one night. No electricity, no one living inside. Yet lights moved in the windows. She said they ran before they got close." Daniel's eyes glinted in the lantern light. "Where is it?" And just like that, the seed was planted. The next morning, Daniel insisted we look for it. Melissa argued, but Aaron sided with him, saying it would be fun, just a short hike, nothing serious. They both turned to me, waiting for my answer. I should have said no. I should have refused. Dragged us back to the safety of the cabin. But instead I hesitated, and in that silence I gave them permission. That was the bad decision. We set out before noon, following a trail through the woods that grew narrower with each step. The trees pressed close, their branches clawing at the sky, blocking out the sun. Hours passed and my legs ached, but Daniel swore he recognized a path leading deeper. Then suddenly, we saw it. The house stood in a small clearing, its walls gray and sagging, windows shattered like broken eyes. The roof caved inward in places, and vines twisted across the stone like veins. The front door leaned off its hinges, groaning softly in the wind. A heavy stillness hung in the air. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The forest was alive everywhere else, but here it was as if the world itself had stepped back. Melissa froze. "We should not be here." Daniel grinned. "It's just wood and stone. Come on, let's look inside." Aaron laughed nervously. 10 minutes. We see it. We leave. That's it. I opened my mouth to object, but the words never came. And then Daniel was already stepping forward, pushing the door open with a long creak. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of rot and damp earth. Dust floated in narrow beams of light cutting through broken windows. The floor creaked under our weight, and every sound echoed too loudly, like the house was listening. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper, faded flowers curling into strange shapes. A staircase rose crookedly from the main hall, its banister cracked and splintered. Old furniture lay scattered, and some broken, some covered in white sheets that had turned yellow with age. Melissa clutched my arm. I don't like this. We need to leave. But Daniel was already wandering deeper, his flashlight beam bouncing across the walls. Look at this place. It's like a time capsule. He was right. It felt as though someone had lived there and then simply vanished, leaving everything to rot. A cracked teacup on the mantel, a pair of shoes by the door, a child's toy half buried in dust. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt interrupted. We explored cautiously, each step groaning beneath us. Aaron joked to hide his nerves, Melissa whispered for us to hurry, and Daniel moved with the restless excitement of someone who believes nothing bad can ever touch him. Then we reached the second floor. The hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with doors. Most hung open, revealing empty rooms with broken furniture. But one door at the far end was shut tight. Daniel grinned. Bet that's where the interesting stuff is. Melissa shook her head. No, we are not opening that. But Daniel was already walking. When his hand touched the knob, a cold draft swept down the hallway, rattling the broken glass in the windows. My chest tightened. I wanted to yell to stop him, but the words froze in my throat. He turned the knob. The door opened, and the house woke up. At first it was subtle, a soft sound like footsteps far below, a whisper of movement at the edge of vision. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe, as though the house itself was pressing in on us. Oh, Melissa clutched my hand, her face pale. Please, Daniel, close it. But he stepped inside. The room was small, almost bare. A single bed stood against the wall, its mattress stained and torn. A chair rested in the corner, tipped slightly as if someone had risen quickly. And on the far wall, words were scratched deep into the plaster. Do not stay. The letters were jagged, carved with desperate force. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us with a sound like thunder. We spun around, but the knob would not turn. The air grew colder, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. Melissa screamed. Aaron pounded the door. Daniel stood frozen, his flashlight trembling in his hand. And then we heard it. A voice, soft, broken, coming from the corner of the room. Leave. But the chair was empty. Now we are going to our third story. It all started with something that should have been harmless. A drive. Just a drive on a Saturday morning. Daniel never thought much about decisions like that. He was the kind of man who liked to think of himself as careful. The type who weighed pros and cons before stepping forward. But on that particular morning, his mind was clouded. He had just lost his job 2 weeks earlier. It was the kind of news that rattled everything in his life. The company where he had worked for 8 years shut down one of its branches. Suddenly, Daniel found himself without the stability that had shaped his adult life. He had applied to new places, but rejection emails piled up. His apartment felt small, suffocating, filled with anxious silence. So when his old college friend Martin called, suggesting they go for a drive and clear the head, Daniel agreed too quickly. That was the first decision, a simple yes. Martin was different from Daniel in almost every way. Where Daniel was cautious, Martin was adventurous, impulsive, always chasing the next thrill. Back in college, Martin had been the one dragging Daniel into risky dares, abandoned buildings, and late-night wanderings. Daniel had always gone along, even when his gut said no. The plan was vague. Just a drive into the countryside, maybe find a place for hiking, or an old diner for lunch. They packed light just snacks, bottles of water, and some cash. Daniel hesitated before leaving his apartment. Something about the whole thing felt unnecessary, but he didn't want to stay trapped in his thoughts. By noon, they had left the city behind. The road stretched into rolling hills, patches of forest, and the occasional farmhouse. Windows down, cool autumn air spilling inside, Martin talked about how much he hated being stuck in routine. He said life was too short to waste on worry. Daniel nodded, though he only half listened. Then came the second decision. They were somewhere near a place locals called Black Hollow, a rural stretch most people avoided. The road had narrowed, flanked by tall trees that bent inward, creating a tunnel of shade. The map on Martin's phone showed a fork ahead. One road continued toward the next town. The other dipped into a dirt path with no clear destination. "Let's take the dirt road," Martin said, grinning. "Looks interesting." Daniel frowned. "It doesn't even show where it goes." "Exactly. That's the point." Every instinct in Daniel screamed no. The paved road was safe, certain. The dirt road was a question mark. But Martin had already slowed, waiting for Daniel's agreement. And just like countless times in college, Daniel gave in. And that was the second bad decision. The dirt road was rough, bouncing the car over roots and rocks. Branches scraped the sides. The forest thickened, swallowing light. Daniel checked his phone, but there was no signal. Martin laughed, enjoying the ride. Daniel tried to smile, but unease coiled in his stomach. After nearly 20 minutes, they reached a clearing. At the center stood a house. It was not just any house. The place looked abandoned for decades. 2 stories tall, its wooden walls were rotted and peeling, windows cracked, roof sagging. The porch leaned like it might collapse under weight. The front door hung crooked on rusted hinges. "This is perfect," Martin said, parking the car. "Perfect for what?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "Exploring. Come on. When's the last time we did something like this?" Daniel shook his head. "This place doesn't look safe." "Safe is boring." Martin was already stepping out. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the house. Something about it chilled him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just decay. It was the stillness. No birds, no insects, no sound at all. The clearing felt cut off from the world, as if time had stopped here. He could have refused. He could have stayed in the car, but he followed. That was the third bad decision. The porch groaned under their weight. Martin pushed the door, and it scraped the floor as it opened. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mold. Wallpaper hung in strips. Furniture lay broken. Glass crunched under their shoes. "Look at this place," Martin whispered, almost reverently. Daniel swallowed. Every step felt like an intrusion. He noticed old photographs on the wall, their images faded, faces blurred. A dining table still stood in one room, set with cracked plates and rusted utensils, as if the people who once lived here had left suddenly and never returned. "Creepy," Martin said with a grin, "but in a good way." They wandered through rooms, Daniel trailing behind, nerves prickling. He thought of how fragile the stairs looked, how the ceiling sagged. He thought of how easily one wrong step could cause injury, but deeper than that was another feeling, a sense that they were not supposed to be here. In one room, they found shelves lined with books swollen with damp. In another, a child's doll sat upright in a rocking chair, its porcelain face cracked. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to leave. "Let's go," he said finally. Martin shook his head. "Not yet. Let's check upstairs." The stairs creaked dangerously, but they climbed. The hallway above was darker, the windows covered by grime. Bedrooms lined each side. The smell of rot was stronger. They entered the first room. A bed frame without a mattress, a wardrobe with its door hanging open, clothes inside eaten by moths. The second room was worse walls covered in scribbled writing. Words Daniel could barely read, repeated over and over. "Do not trust the hollow. Do not trust the house." He froze. "Martin, look at this." Martin leaned closer, smirking. "Probably some crazy person lived here." Daniel shook his head. "We shouldn't be here." Martin shrugged, moving on. They entered the last room at the end of the hall. This one was different. The air was colder, sharper. In the middle stood a trunk, its lid slightly open. "Treasure chest," Martin joked, stepping forward. Daniel grabbed his arm. "Don't." But Martin shook him off and opened the trunk. Inside were objects wrapped in yellowed cloth. He unwrapped one, a small journal bound in cracked leather. Daniel's chest tightened. Something about that book felt wrong. "Let's see what secrets we've got," Martin said, flipping it open. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting. Stories, not stories of daily life, but accounts of things seen in the woods. Figures watching from the trees. Voices calling names at night. Descriptions of the house itself as if it had a will. Daniel's skin crawled. "Put it back." Martin ignored him, flipping further. The last entry was short. "The house does not let go. The hollow takes what it wants." A chill swept through the room. Daniel felt it, like the house itself had exhaled. "We need to leave," he said firmly. Martin frowned, but tucked the journal under his arm. "Fine, let's head out." That was the fourth bad decision. They should have left it there. They hurried downstairs. The house seemed darker, heavier. The door they had come through looked farther away. Shadows clung to corners. Daniel felt watched. When they reached the porch, the clearing outside had changed. The car was gone. Daniel blinked hard. The clearing was empty, grass flattened where the car had stood, but nothing else. "What the—" "Oh," Martin muttered. Panic surged through Daniel. "Where's the car?" "It was right here," Martin said, spinning in circles. They rushed to the tree line, but the dirt road was gone too. Only thick forest surrounded the clearing. No path, no tracks, no sound of birds or wind. Daniel's breath quickened. "This isn't possible." Martin clutched the journal tighter. His grin was gone now. "Maybe we're lost." "Lost?" Daniel snapped. "The road was right there. The car was right there." But the forest was silent. They turned back toward the house. Its windows looked different now, darker, as if eyes stared out. "We need to go inside," Martin said quietly. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Are you insane? We need to find a way out." "There is no way out," Martin whispered. Daniel realized his friend's voice had changed. It carried a hollow echo, as if something else spoke through him. The journal slipped from Martin's hand, falling open on the ground. Daniel's eyes caught the words, "The house marks one. The hollow keeps both." A sound rose from the house, a low moan, like wood shifting, but deeper, almost human. Daniel's body screamed to run, but where? The forest was endless. The house loomed behind them. He had made too many bad decisions, and now there was no right one left.